There is a question that almost no one dares to ask aloud. Not in mosques, not in government offices, not at family dinners in Cairo, Tehran, Karachi, or Istanbul, but millions of people ask it silently. The question is simple and devastating. What happens to a religion when the people who are supposed to represent it destroy it from within? Islam is one of the most powerful forces in human history. Nearly 2 billion people identify with it. It shapes the laws, cultures, calendars, and daily rhythms of life in dozens of countries. It is the fastest growing religion in the world, at least on paper. But paper tells one story, reality tells another. Because right now, beneath the surface of official statistics, beneath public prayers and state-imposed piety, something extraordinary is happening. Something no government wants to admit, no cleric wants to acknowledge, and no headline has fully captured. Islam, as experienced by millions of its own followers, is undergoing the most serious internal crisis of the modern era. And the story of how it got here, and where it is headed, is the story you are about to hear. The official data on Islam looks unshakable. According to Pew Research, Muslims have a global retention rate of 99%. In Indonesia, the largest Muslim-majority country on earth, the numbers going in and coming out are virtually identical. In Pakistan, in Egypt, across the Middle East, fewer than 1% of people report leaving the faith. The statistics suggest a religion with no cracks, no doubts, no exits. But those numbers are not measuring belief, they are measuring fear. In a significant portion of the Muslim world, leaving Islam is not a private spiritual decision. It is a criminal act. In countries like Afghanistan and Iran, public apostasy can mean imprisonment or death. In Saudi Arabia, promoting atheist thought is legally classified as terrorism. In Pakistan, a social media post questioning religious doctrine can trigger a blasphemy charge. And blasphemy charges in Pakistan have a way of attracting mobs before they ever reach a courtroom. So when a survey researcher shows up and asks whether someone is Muslim, the answer is obvious. You say yes. You have always said yes. You will keep saying yes. Because the alternative is not just social embarrassment, it is survival. The real picture only becomes visible where people can actually speak freely. In the United States, nearly 1 in 4 people raised Muslim have left the faith. In Canada and across Western Europe, similar numbers emerge. When the legal and social cost of leaving is removed, a significant portion of people walk away. And then there is Iran, where the most striking data of all came not from a Western think tank, but from an anonymous survey of 50,000 Iranians conducted in 2020. The results were staggering. Only 32% still identified as Shia Muslim, the sect the Iranian constitution mandates as the foundation of the entire state. Over 20% said they had no religion at all. More than half admitted they had once been believers and had since lost their faith entirely. This is a country where official records claim 99% Islamic identification, and privately, the population has collapsed in ways the government cannot acknowledge. The data does not lie. The surveys do. And once you understand the gap between the two, you begin to understand what is actually happening. To understand the crisis inside Islam today, you need to understand one critical mechanism. Because the collapse is not random. It follows a pattern. And that pattern has a name. When religion becomes the state's failures become religion's failures. Iran is the clearest case study the modern world has ever produced. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution created the first modern theocracy governed by Shia clerics. Religious law became civil law. Morality police walked the streets enforcing dress codes. Attending prayers was not a personal act of devotion. It was a public performance monitored by the system. An entire nation was told that God's governance had arrived, and that following it would bring justice, dignity, and prosperity. What followed was 4.5 decades of economic stagnation, political repression, international isolation, and systemic corruption. The children and grandchildren of that revolution did not inherit a spiritual vision. They inherited a suffocating bureaucracy wearing the face of religion. They watched clerics preach sacrifice while living in luxury. They watched morality police enforce rules on the street that the enforcers themselves ignored at home. They watched criticism be silenced in the name of protecting God, when everyone could see it was power, not God, being protected. The breaking point came in 2022. A young woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police for wearing her hijab improperly. She died in their custody. What followed was one of the largest waves of protest Iran had seen in decades. Women publicly removed their headscarves. Crowds burned images of the supreme leader. The slogan that spread across the country was not a call for a different interpretation of Islam. It was a call for freedom from the system that had spoken in Islam's name. A bitter joke that circulates among Iranians captures it with brutal precision. We asked God for an Islamic republic. He gave it to us, and in doing so, He cured us of our Islam. The same dynamic, with different faces, repeated across the region. In Saudi Arabia, the ruling elite spent decades enforcing strict religious conformity on the public, banning cinema, policing women's dress, segregating spaces, while senior figures lived entirely different lives abroad. The hypocrisy was not invisible. In Afghanistan, the Taliban returned in 2021 and immediately banned women from education, from most employment, from public life. They mandated beards, enforced prayer attendance, and enforced a version of Islam that even most of the Muslim world rejected. Those who could flee, fled. Those who remained developed an intimate relationship with resistance. The lesson across every one of these examples is the same. You cannot force a person to genuinely believe. You can force a person to perform. And when performance replaces belief for long enough, eventually the performance itself becomes the object of contempt. There is a phenomenon unfolding across the Muslim world that has no official name, no government record, and no visible face. It is the life lived in two layers, public and private, performed and real. On Reddit, a forum called r/xmuslim has grown from a few hundred members into a global community of hundreds of thousands. The testimonies there read like dispatches from a hidden world. An Egyptian man who has fasted every Ramadan for 6 years in front of his family while privately eating in secret. A Pakistani woman who attends every family prayer while feeling, in her words, like she is suffocating. An Iranian student who uses Islamic greetings automatically, the way someone might say, "Have a nice day," while believing none of it. The psychological toll described in these accounts is not casual. It is anxiety. It is depression. It is the specific exhaustion of maintaining a performance that can never slip, because slipping carries consequences that range from being disowned to being killed. What makes this moment historically different from past periods of religious doubt is the internet. A teenager in Karachi who quietly types into a search engine, "I don't believe in Islam anymore. What do I do?" no longer finds silence. They find thousands of people who said the same thing. They find communities. They find arguments. They find a world that was invisible to their parents and completely inaccessible to their grandparents. The internet did not create doubt. Doubt is as old as religion. But the internet ended the isolation of doubt. It shattered the monopoly that clerics held over information and over the sense that questioning was something only dangerous outsiders did. It made millions of people realize they were not alone. Governments across the Muslim world understand this perfectly. Iran has attempted to build a domestic internet that walls citizens off from the outside. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan employ cyber police specifically to track down and silence atheist bloggers and social media accounts. In Bangladesh, multiple secularist writers were killed in the streets in targeted attacks. These are not the actions of confident systems. These are the actions of systems that know they are losing a battle over minds they can no longer control. They are not wrong. VPNs, proxy servers, encrypted messaging. The technological literacy of younger generations outpaces the capacity of governments to suppress it. Every attempt at censorship becomes evidence in the minds of the doubters that there is something worth hiding. Every society operates on an implicit contract. You follow the rules. The rules deliver results. When the results stop coming, the contract collapses. Across the Muslim-majority world, that contract is broken. The MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, carries the highest youth unemployment rate on Earth. More than 1 in 4 young people are jobless. In Tunisia and Jordan, the figure climbs above 40%. These are not uneducated young people. Many have university degrees. They studied what they were told to study. They followed the path they were told would lead somewhere, and they arrived at nothing. Young men sit in cafes with no jobs, no futures, and a smartphone full of global comparisons. Young women navigate systems built to limit their movement, restrict their choices, and assign their value based on their obedience. The economic system has failed them. The political system has failed them. And because both of those systems have spent decades wrapping themselves in religious legitimacy, claiming that their authority comes from God, that their laws reflect God's design, that following the faith will deliver the promised life, their failure lands directly on religion's account. Half of young Arabs now agree with the statement that religious values are holding the Arab world back. That is not a fringe opinion. That is tens of millions of people concluding, based on their direct experience, that the sacred and the broken are not opposites. They are the same thing. Trust in religious leadership has collapsed across measurable data. In Iraq, public confidence in religious leaders fell by nearly 40% between 2013 and 2019. In Sudan, it halved. Egypt's brief experiment with democratic Islamist governance under the Muslim Brotherhood ended within a year, with the same citizens who had hoped for it demanding the military remove it. Then came ISIS, a group that claimed to restore the original, pure vision of Islamic governance. Their caliphate lasted only a few years, but what it revealed was irreversible. What happens when you actually try to implement the vision of a religious state in its most extreme form? You get slavery, executions in the public square, mass displacement, a hellscape that Muslims themselves found revolting. ISIS did not prove Islam was violent, but it permanently poisoned the credibility of anyone who claims religious authority should translate directly into political power. In Turkey, President Erdogan spent 2 decades building what he called a pious generation. He expanded Islamic schools, mandated religious education, inserted Islam into public institutions at every level. The result was the opposite of what he intended. Turkish youth are less religious today than they were before the project began. Students in classrooms increasingly resist religious instruction. Surveys show falling rates of prayer and fasting among the young. The state tried to manufacture faith, and it manufactured rejection instead. The pattern is the same everywhere it appears. The harder the system presses, the more the pressure creates the very thing it is trying to prevent. The most important thing to understand about this crisis is that it is not primarily about theology. It is about power, hypocrisy, and the experience of people whose lives have been shaped by systems that promised everything and delivered something else entirely. And within that crisis, one group is leading the quiet transformation more visibly than any other: women. For millions of women in conservative Muslim societies, the experience of religion has not primarily been spiritual. It has been structural. A framework of rules that determined what they could wear, where they could go, who they could marry, what they could own, and what counted as their worth. When they questioned those rules, the answer was always the same. This is not culture. This is not tradition. This is God's law. And you do not question God's law, but questioning it is exactly what they did. University campuses became the turning point for many. Education opened a window to a world where women in other societies lived with rights and freedoms that were not presented as violations of divine order, where entire nations functioned without the restrictions that had been framed as eternal and non-negotiable. The moment of awakening described by many women who left the faith carries a consistent emotional signature. Not anger at first, but clarity. The sense of a blindfold finally removed, and then, slowly, a new and terrifying question. If this was always a choice, whose choice was it? In Iran, the act of publicly removing the hijab became one of the most powerful political symbols of the decade. Women standing in streets or filming themselves in cars, taking off the veil, were not just making a fashion statement. They were performing the most visible possible declaration that they were reclaiming ownership of themselves. Organizations now exist specifically to support women navigating the process of leaving. Networks that offer what no family in these situations is likely to offer: validation, community, and the knowledge that the thing they are experiencing has a name, and that name is not sin. What this generation of women is doing is not simply leaving a religion. They are refusing to carry a system forward to the next generation. The women who shape families, who raise children, who transmit or reject cultural inheritance, they are choosing, in growing numbers, not to pass it on. This is what makes the current shift different from every previous period of religious doubt within Islam. It is not a philosophical debate among scholars. It is a generational, demographic shift playing out in real time. The median age across much of the Muslim world is in the 20s. These young people grew up in a globalized, connected world. They have seen the contradictions. They have measured the promises against the reality. And a critical mass of them have reached a quiet, private, but irreversible conclusion. The system that claimed to speak for God did not deliver what it promised. It delivered control. It delivered corruption. It delivered misery dressed in sacred language. And once you see that clearly enough, you cannot unsee it. This is not the end of Islam. Religions do not die the way empires do, suddenly and visibly. But what is happening right now, across Iran and Tunisia and Turkey and Egypt and beyond, is a hollowing. The outer shell remains. The performances continue. The statistics still show what the statistics have always shown, but the belief that once filled those numbers, the genuine interior personal conviction, is quietly, irreversibly leaving. Not in protests, not in announcements. In the private decision of one person after another, alone in their room, choosing not to pass the performance on. The question is not whether this transformation is happening. It is already happening. The question is what comes after a faith of 2 billion people confronts the gap between what it was promised to be and what it has been made into. That answer does not yet exist. But the people who live within that question are already writing it, silently, and in increasing numbers, every day. And now, it's your turn. What do you think about the situation of Islam? Did you really expect Muslims to end up like this? I'll read your comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.